Welcome back, Chappelle. All right, so we left off talking about, or getting into a little bit in most of our classes. Actually, let's go ahead and just jump back, just in case we got cut off in a couple of classes. But we got into talking about how we're going to be discussing absolutism within Europe between Spain, France, Russia, England, sort of. We're going to also talk about the Holy Roman Empire and some other areas like that. But in class, we should have, and I can't account for all of them, but we should have gotten to Charles V, okay? Charles V is going to emerge in the early 1500s as the first, sign, image, era of absolutist thought and theory, okay? Here comes Charles V, and he is rising to prominence and dominance as the guy who will be considered the first absolutist, right? This guy is going to become an absolutist at the age of 19, and he's going to be from the very, very wealthy Habsburg family, right? And just like we talked about in C period, and I know we did in B period, but I haven't gotten to G period yet, so I don't know if we talked about it there. We talked about how it was possible that one 19-year-old kid ended up controlling Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, parts of Italy, Netherlands, everything in North and South America. Make sure you have that under here as well. North and South America, all the Spanish colonies in North and South America. And how basically it was a 1 out of 5 chance that if you were standing on hard land in the world, it might have belonged to Charles V. He has an old famous quote where he says, I speak Spanish to my family and blink, blink to my other people. Hold on, I got to look it up for you real quick. But the big thing about Charles V is you also know Charles V. You've heard of Charles V before. Does anybody remember this bad boy? Thing called the Diet. Oh God, what are we doing? The Diet of Worms, right? The Diet of Worms is the meeting that was called in 1521 to bring forward Martin Luther to take account for all of his ideas in his misunderstanding, or his apparent misunderstandings by the Catholic Church of religion and faith. And the guy that called the meeting after Martin Luther had already been excommunicated is Charles V. That's him right there. So we have actually talked about events that have had Charles V inside of them. And at this point, he wasn't even 19. He was actually close to 21, 22. And so this is a major event in history. So he's a part of the Reformation. He's a part of absolutism. He's part of the era of exploration. He's part of everything. He actually was elected Holy Roman Empire and was the king of Spain as well when Cortez begins his conquest of the Aztecs, when Pizarro goes out and takes over the Inca. That's all under Charles V, right? Now, I speak German to my horse, is what Charles V said one time, because he controlled so much territory. He said this one time in a quote, I speak Spanish to God, Italian to women, French to men, and German to my horse, right? Because he had to know how to speak all these different languages because he controlled so much land, right? And also, he's a big-time Catholic, okay? That is a big reason why he was heavily involved in the Reformation, right? Well, early on, though, he actually did not want to persecute the Protestants. As a Catholic, he believed that it was especially important to keep an open heart and open dialogue between this new faith. But then, it wasn't until his princes began to turn on him and hide Martin Luther during the Reformation until he decided to go after the Protestants, right? But he's a big-time Catholic. However, he did pass laws letting Germany pick their religion. And the reason why we bring this up is because it's very, very important to understand that Charles V is not a bad leader. What you need to write down on this, you should have had it in class, is just this first sentence, right? Just this first sentence. Charles seriously didn't have a shot to control the entire amount of land that he owned. He just didn't. There was no way. You're talking about a guy controlling somewhere in the neighborhood of 20% of all terrestrial planes in the entire world. That is insane. That is savage. That is ridiculous. There's no way one man can control all of that, right? And he is our first absolutist due to the fact that he said something or passed a decree. That is how it happened, right? And he ends up doing this through marriages of convenience and bribing the electors and things like that, which is really important. But Charles, seriously, didn't have a shot. His holdings included every piece of land that Spain conquered. Many historians think that he was doomed to failure from the start just because of the fact that its sheer size was too much to control, right? Look at all this stuff. He controlled this and this and this and this, and that's not even including everything in North and South America. Massive amount of territory. So due to this fact, Charles is going to crack under the pressure. Our very first absolutist sets the tone that there is a limit to how much land you can control as an absolutist, right? Charles V, the Habsburg leader himself, with his goofy jaw that we'll talk about here in 2 seconds, couldn't handle the pressure, right? And what he does is he freaks out. He abdicates his throne. Let me double check on the year that he abdicated his throne, okay? But he abdicates his throne, and he splits his family in half. Charles V, abdication. Abdication, here we go. He abdicates the throne in 1556 after only ruling for about like 30-something years, right? And so he's in his early 50s when he's like, I can't do this. And he splits his family in half. And you can actually see on the Habsburg crest, let me go back, on the Habsburg crest that his family was split in half because it is an eagle with two heads, right? Two heads of one family. So he splits it in half and he creates an Austrian branch and he creates a Spanish branch, right? And the big thing about it is he retires rule or passes rule down to his son, Philip II. So Philip gets Spain, all the North and South American colonies, and the Netherlands, right? And then he gives the Holy Roman Empire and all the Austrian lands to his brother Ferdinand. Now, we don't need to worry about Ferdinand. Ferdinand's not important. But we do need to worry about Philip, right? Because Philip is going to be our next absolutist, right? And he's going to have a lot of crazy dealings with a lot of different people that we got to make sure we know, okay? Now, the other thing about Charles, some of y'all would like to know, is what happened to Charles in the long run? Where did he go? What happened to him? He actually retired to a French monastery. He retires to a French monastery where he wants to live out his life in peace and quiet, right? He goes to a French monastery due to the fact that the monks have to take vows of silence. They have regular duties every single day, so he believed it was somewhere quiet he could go to deal with two problems he had. He was a very, very bad alcoholic, and he had a disease known as gout, right? And gout is when you get a crystalline, like the fluid from in between your joints begins to leak out, and it crystallizes on top of your joints, flaring the nerve endings and causing severe pain. This is what gout looks like. Gout. This is what Charles V had, okay? So, images. This is what gout looks like. See? Right here, where it's like bubbling up and crystallizing all on the outside. Gout can sometimes be as bad as this and create very, very large, like, areas of these crystalline things on your ankles and your joints. And the big thing is he lived with that, and alcohol makes it even worse. And he's an alcoholic, so he was in a lot of pain all the time, right? And also, if you remember from class, Charles V was genetically predisposed to mental illness, right? Because his mother, Joanna the Mad, actually we believe might have had either bipolar disorder or possibly paranoid schizophrenia, but we're not sure, right? Now, looking at this whole thing, he then just begins to isolate himself away, right? Because he can't move around very much. He's in a lot of pain. And he covers his walls in clocks, right? And they're all ticking at different times, and he's freaking out, and he's like, I'm going to die one day. This is the worst. What's going to happen? Da, 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 da. And then one day he decides, he's like, but I want to know how much everybody loves me. So he fakes his own funeral. That's right, Charles V fakes his own funeral to see how many people show up. For my Friends fans out there, Ross did that in an episode, right? It was really, really funny. And then he decides to fake his own funeral, and at the funeral, he's laying in the casket with a big white sheet or sheer cloth that goes around so you could see his body. He had a little bit of makeup put on his face, probably, I don't know, to make it look like he was dead. And he kept listening to what everybody said when they came up to the casket to say their final regards. And he got so mad midway through the funeral because he thought people weren't sad enough that he sat up out of the casket and stormed off to his room, and then nobody saw him again, right? And he eventually dies later on. But he had passed rule on to his son, Philip, right? Now, other really big thing, let's talk about spotting a Habsburg, right? You don't have to write all this down, okay? You do not have to write all this down. The interesting part is the Habsburgs are going to continue to gain control and keep control within their family, right? We have two branches now, the Spanish branch and the Austrian branch. And the way that they believed to keep power and money in their family was to try and marry their sons and daughters off to their first cousins, other Habsburgs, which is disgusting. And this is going to cause a terrible set of genetic defects, including sterility, and then also including this very, very famous thing known as the Habsburg Jaw, right? They had a severe underbite, right? Their bottom set of teeth actually went like further out, and this guy was the worst one that ever showed it. His name is Carlos II. He's the last king of Spain, and he's going to be the last king of Spain during the late 1600s, early 1700s, and his death leads to the War of Spanish Succession. But his Habsburg Jaw was so bad, he couldn't he couldn't talk until I think he was 4. Let me double check that number. He couldn't talk until he was 8, and he didn't walk until he was 4 due to all of his other genetic deformities, right? But this is a guy, that is Carlos II, or Charles II of Spain. And he ends up never having children, and he is the last Habsburg leader of Spain because they just married each other's cousins all the time. But look at that Habsburg Jaw. Apparently, he was a very good marksman, though. Apparently, he could shoot a clay target out of the air like really, really easily. And apparently, he'd be like, pull, two, pow. Actually, he'd probably be like, and because he could barely speak. And he drooled constantly. But that's just to give a little fun fact about the Habsburgs. And you can actually see Philip II is a Habsburg. Look at this underbite, right? So he's a Habsburg because of that jaw, right? So now Philip is not like his father. Philip's a little bit different. Philip's a shy, pretty stoic guy, very recluse, but he is not just a big-time Catholic, he's a fierce Catholic. His father, Philip believed that Charles V, his father, was too lenient on the Protestants early and allowed Protestantism to spread, right? And the biggest place that frustrated Philip the most was the fact that Protestantism had spread to England, right? And he wanted to snuff it out there. Now, he takes over Portugal, and when he does this, he becomes the wealthiest and richest ruler in the entire world because the North American and South American colonies underneath his rule are beginning to put out major amounts of gold and major amounts of silver. And they're also beginning to do sugarcane plantations in the colonies as well. And this is all in the late 1500s, right? So he had been ruling since 1556 when Charles V abdicated, right? So Philip II, though, decides that that little bit of land is not enough. So he marries the new Queen of England. I think it's 1559 when he marries bloody flipping Mary, all right? The daughter of Henry VIII and his cousin, which is gross, all right? So bloody Mary. He marries her. Why does he marry her? He marries her because she's a Catholic, right? She is a Catholic, and he believes that in this process, he will become King of England. And he does, right? But because of the fact that England has what's known as a parliament, right? It has a parliament, a parliamentary body, and also a constitution, he was a king by title only. He did actually not rule over the entirety of England, right? And also, just to give you a heads up, their marriage is an absolute joke. You do not need to write this whole thing. You can just summarize it a little bit, right? Their marriage is a joke. She was way older than he was. When they got married, I think she was 37, and I think he was in his late 20s, so she was at least 10 years older than he was, at least, right? And then also, they kept trying to have children, apparently. They say they kept trying to have children. Philip II claims that he never actually slept in the same bed with her, but we don't even know that for sure. He didn't even live in England. He cheated on her constantly. They never had kids. And also, Mary was convinced at one point, she was like, he is so handsome. Philip II's so beautiful. And then he was like, she's old and gross and I don't like her, but I like being the King of England, right? And then Mary at one point had what was known as a phantom pregnancy, right? Mary apparently believed so ardently that she was pregnant that her stomach swelled and everyone thought that she was pregnant because her menstrual cycle also stopped. But the big thing about it was they found out later on that there was no baby in that belly. It was all in her mind, right? So their marriage, not the best thing ever, okay? And she's going to die early on without ruling for very long. She was only on the throne for a few years because she was so much older, right? And he loses the kingship of England when she dies, right? Now, he hates Elizabeth's guts, right? Elizabeth I comes to power after Mary dies, right? And why does he hate Elizabeth? Hates Elizabeth for two reasons. One, he tries to marry her and she tells him no. So she was like, I'm not marrying you. I'm not marrying anybody. She only ever wanted to marry one dude named Robert Dudley, and that didn't go very well, and he ended up marrying somebody else, and then she swore off marriage for the rest of her life, even though we know for a fact she probably had some romantic encounters with some pirates like Sir Walter Raleigh and Sir Francis Drake. Now, but really quick though, he ends up getting really frustrated with her because he's got an issue. Jot this down. Very, very important. The Dutch are revolting and the English side with them, okay? So the big place that Philip during this time period owned up until 1581 was the Netherlands, right? He controlled that. When his father abdicated, he received the Netherlands, right? So big thing about the Netherlands, though, the Netherlands as of 1581 declared themselves an independent country and were willing to go to war to fight off the Spanish in the hopes of actually earning their right in their revolt and also their kingdom, their countryship, right? And the English, under Elizabeth, ally with the Dutch. Now, this infuriates Philip because not only did she refuse to marry him, but now she is allied with the Dutch, right? So Philip decides that he wants to invade England directly. And this event is going to be known as the Spanish Armada. and I believe it occurred in 1588. All right, so now Spanish Armada. And it did. Yes, 1588. Look at your boy, Mr. Terry. All right, so in 1588, Philip decides, I'm going to get a bunch of boats. I'm going to pack those boats full of soldiers. I'm going to put a bunch of cannons on them. I'm going to go over there, and I'm going to destroy England on the ground and invade them and dethrone them because they're being led by a girl. Well, first of all, one, you big sexist, all right? So, you're not, because you're not going to win, all right? Spoiler alert, Philip loses, even though he should have won, okay? Because the English were heavily outnumbered by the Spanish. The English only had somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 60 ships, and the Spanish had 130 ships. And the Spanish ships were called Spanish Galleons, right? And the Galleons were huge. They contained several heads of cannons, lots of guns, lots of military, lots of armor, lots of trade goods, right? And so they go up there, but the big thing that Philip underestimated is the fact that you're fighting in English waters, right? So the English are going to win mainly due to the fact that their boats are smaller, more maneuverable, and actually were able to surround and split the Spanish vessels and sink several of them at an early engagement. That's all because of Sir Francis Drake. Also because they use these things known as fire ships, right? The English scared the daylights out of the Spanish by taking old boats, setting them on fire, and launching them at the Spanish, right? Imagine you're a Spanish soldier on the galleon, and you see a giant fiery ship coming directly at you with no one on it. It's like a big missile. You're freaking out, right? And then also, the English won because they got a little bit lucky, right? Just a little bit lucky, okay? The big thing about it, they got lucky because Philip, after he lost, or his admirals anyway, his naval officers decided, now that we've lost the Spanish Armada, we need to figure out what the heck we're going to do next. We need reinforcements, and we need a military. Where can we go? And so the Spanish decide to sail all the way around. I can actually pick you up, and I can show you what I'm talking about. So the original fights for the Spanish Armada happened right about... there we go. They happen right about here in the English Channel, right? And also in these inlets around England. So this is where England's going to win their first battle with these fire ships. Then Spain's going to sail all the way around Scotland, all the way over here, and they want to land in Ireland and make an army here. Why Ireland? Because Ireland is ferociously Catholic, right? Very, very Catholic, and England is super Protestant. So they were thinking if we invade Ireland, you know what, the Tudors have been really mean to the Irish for hundreds of years, ever since, what's his name? Henry VIII, right? So if we invade Ireland and get an army, then we can sail right here and we can attack them terrestrially using an Irish and Spanish army, right? Now, what happened right here, though, on the backside of Scotland and backside of Ireland, they hit a lot of storms, and that ended up destroying several of the Spanish ships. Also, the Spanish ships had to retreat because they were running so low on supplies, and so much of their supplies were spoiling by this time, right? So spoiled food, fire ships, and a little bit of luck is going to be how the English, under the rule of a woman, right, Elizabeth I, is going to end up destroying the Spanish military and basically creates a system where the Spanish then soon after begin their heavy decline, right? So now, big thing though also, Spanish power is going to begin to decline after this loss to England. Now, I had somebody one time comment on my video, and they were like, actually, the Spanish continue to be dark. Yes, the Spanish continue to be relevant, but their economy and their influence begins to decline in the 1600s following things like the Treaty of London and other stuff like that. Now, big thing, though, with this is Spanish power starts to go down. The Spanish Armada is kind of the siren song for the Spanish Empire, right? And right before their decline, they did actually enter into a golden age of art and literature, right? Greco and Velázquez happened to arrive as two of their very famous painters. This right here is El Greco. This right here is Velázquez, right? And this is La Minueta, and we will talk about it tomorrow in class a little bit. You can actually see Mom and Dad are over here in the mirror because this is Velázquez, and he's painting them. We'll talk about it tomorrow. But it's this is some of the height of Spanish art and Spanish literature. And then a very famous book comes out of this period of time, the golden age of Spanish art and literature. You talked about this in Mr. Roddy's class, Don Quixote, written by a man named Cervantes, right? And Cervantes writes this story about Don Quixote, this little old man and his assistant, Sancho Panza, right? And this little old man is obsessed with times that are now gone, right? He believes that the modern era has left behind medieval chivalry and has given up the fact that knights used to roam this territory and be amazing and save damsels and rue the day, right? Or rule the day, not rue the day. And there's a very, very famous scene where, Don Quixote was on top of his little old horse, and his little old horse is looking at this giant windmill, and this giant windmill is like, Don Quixote thinks it's a giant, and he charges at it with a lance. And I know y'all learned all about that in Mr. Roddy's class because he's the man. All right, so now, also, when I was talking about the fact that Spain's beginning an economic decline, a lot of it has to do with the fact of that original cause when we talked about the Dutch, inflation, and the fact that things are getting way too expensive, right? So now inflation is mainly just, we know what that is already. Their money is losing value, okay? But I need you to write something underneath this right here, okay? So put money lost value. And why, question mark, the reason why the money is losing value is because they're getting so much gold and silver from their colonies that it's putting too much gold into their economy and it's devaluing all of their money, right? So, like, they had too much money. I'm not kidding. The Spanish literally had so much money that it destroyed their economy, right? So the gold and silver coming in from the colonies caused a rapid amount of inflation, right? And then also, due to the fact that things are getting too expensive. Now, Jews and Muslims used to be two very, very heavy populated groups inside of Spain. But under Ferdinand and Isabella was this thing called the Spanish Inquisition, right? So underneath this, put Spanish Inquisition, okay, with a little star next to it. No Jews and Muslims were allowed to really exist inside of Spain anymore. The Spanish Inquisition under the Castile family forced Jews and Muslims to either get out or convert, right? And in this process, there's going to be torture. There's going to be people that are going to be executed. There's going to be people that are going to convert but then be accused of not actually having converted. Did you eat bacon today? And so if you didn't, you're going to jail. Now, all this other stuff begins to happen. And so a lot of Jews and Muslims flee. Now, the big thing about it is the Jews and the Muslims, were artisans, craft workers, lawyers, doctors, intelligent, because ever since the Middle Ages, their communities had held on to the intelligence of the Romans and the Greeks for eons, right? And without them, the quality of the products went way down, right? So as the Jews and Muslims were kicked out, the quality of product goes down, and Spanish people do not buy goods from other Spanish people. They start buying them from French people. They start buying them from German people. And so it destroys their economy, right? And then also the Dutch are going to revolt, like we talked about, as of 1581 against Spain. And with the help of England, that's going to cause a massive amount of debt. I mean, as in the England helped the Dutch, right? So that's the big thing right there. And that's where we're going to stop, all right? So that's the Habsburg rule in Spain. Those are our two first absolutists, right? Charles V and Philip II. The big thing about Philip II you need to know is of his hang-ups after his father abdicated, him being really mad and trying to invade England. But I'll talk to you guys later. Y'all have a good one.